There are moments that split your life into before and after. Not the loud ones. Not the ones you see coming from a mile away. Quiet ones. The ones that happen on an ordinary Tuesday morning while the coffee is still brewing and the birds are doing whatever birds do outside a kitchen window in Fayetteville, North Carolina. This was one of those moments. I was standing in the doorway of my bedroom watching my mother-in-law pull my dress uniform out of the closet. She had it by the hanger, holding it away from her body slightly the way you hold something you find distasteful. She walked through the hallway. She walked through the kitchen. She pushed open the back door. And she dropped it in the trash can. She dusted her hands together. She said, "No army brat is going to ruin my son's life." Then she smiled at me. I did not say a single word. 3 hours later, a United States Army general knocked on her front door. And that smile disappeared so fast it was like watching someone turn off a light. My name is Sergeant First Class Diane Louise Carver. I am 38 years old. I have served in the United States Army for 14 years. I have been deployed 3 times. I have 2 commendations and a service medal that sits in a shadow box above my desk at home. That uniform she put in the trash was the one I was supposed to wear to a formal ceremony at Fort Bragg in 4 hours. But I will get to that. First, you need to understand who Patricia Hollis really was, and what the 18 months before that Tuesday morning had actually looked like inside the house I shared with her son. I grew up in a small town called Laurinburg, North Carolina, 45 minutes south of Fayetteville. Population 15,000. My father was career military. 22 years in the Army. He retired as a master sergeant when I was 16 and went to work at the hardware store on Main Street because he said he needed something to do with his hands. My mother taught Sunday school at First Baptist for 30 years. She made biscuits from scratch every Saturday morning without fail. Not from a can. From memory. Flour and buttermilk and cold butter cut in with a pastry cutter until it looked right. She never measured anything. She said, "Diane, you learn to feel when something is right. That goes for biscuits and for people." I joined the Army at 19. Not because I did not have other options. I had a partial scholarship to UNC Pembroke. I joined because I had grown up watching my father serve and I understood in my bones what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. 14 years later, I still understood that. I met James Hollis at a friend's backyard cookout in Fayetteville on a July 4th evening 4 years ago. He was 36. Civilian. He worked in logistics for a medical supply company on Rayford Road. He had a quiet way of listening that reminded me of my father. He brought potato salad to that cookout. Homemade. I should have known then that I was in trouble. We dated for 14 months. Got engaged on a Thursday evening in September. Simple ring. Oval diamond. White gold. He proposed on the back porch of my rental house on Cliffdale Road with 2 glasses of sweet tea and no audience. I said yes before he finished the sentence. James's mother, Patricia, lived 40 minutes away in Pinehurst. A retirement community. Not the kind with shuffleboard and bingo. The kind with a golf course and a clubhouse and a homeowners association that sent letters about grass length. I met her 6 weeks into dating James. Sunday dinner at her house. She opened the door and looked at me the way some women look at other women, a full scan from shoes to hairline, and said, "So you are the soldier." Not, "It is lovely to meet you." Not, "James has told me so much about you." Just, "So you are the soldier." Like it was a condition she was being asked to accept. I smiled. I held out the flowers I had brought. Yellow tulips because James had mentioned she liked yellow. She took them without looking at them. She said, "We usually have fresh flowers from the garden for Sunday dinner." "But thank you." James squeezed my hand behind her back. He said, "Mom, Diane drove all the way from Fayetteville." She said, "I know where she drove from, James. Come inside." That was the first Sunday. There were 43 more just like it over the next 18 months. I counted. Let me tell you what 18 months with Patricia Hollis actually looked like. 'Cause the uniform in the trash was not the beginning. It was just the moment she finally ran out of subtlety. Patricia was 64 years old. Widowed. James was her only child. She had raised him alone after his father passed when James was 11. She had worked as an office manager at a dental practice in Pinehurst for 22 years to put him through college. She had sacrificed genuinely and completely, and she wore that sacrifice the way some people wear jewelry. Visible. Intentional. Always present. I understood that sacrifice. What I did not understand, what took me longer than it should have to understand, was that Patricia had decided before she ever met me that no woman was going to be enough for the son she had raised alone. And a woman in uniform was going to be especially not enough. She had a particular set of concerns about military life that she shared with me over those 43 Sunday dinners in ways that were always just polite enough that I could not directly object to them. She said things like, "I just worry about what deployment does to a marriage." She said things like, "James has always needed stability. I'm not sure a military schedule provides that." She said things like, "I am not against women in the military, of course. I just think when children come into the picture, priorities need to shift." We were not yet engaged when she said that last one. I had been dating her son for 4 months. James always said the same thing after those dinners. He said she just needs time. I had heard that somewhere before. The engagement made things worse in the way that removing a lid from a pressure cooker makes things worse. Suddenly Patricia had opinions about everything. The venue. The date. The guest list. Whether a military ceremony was appropriate for a civilian wedding. She called James 3 times a week minimum. Sometimes more. I know because I could hear his side of the conversations through the walls of our apartment on Cliffdale Road. James had moved in 6 months after we got engaged. Calls always came in the evening. They always lasted between 22 and 40 minutes. And James always came out of the bedroom afterward looking like a man who had been asked to solve a problem that had no solution. I did not ask what they talked about. I already knew. The Sunday dinners continued after the engagement. I kept going because James asked me to and because I had made a decision early on that I was not going to be the reason he lost his relationship with his mother. That was my choice. I stand by it. But I want to tell you about one specific Sunday in February. 3 months before the uniform incident. We were at Patricia's house in Pinehurst. Pot roast. Green beans. Rolls from a can that she put in a basket to look homemade. James was in the kitchen helping her with something. I was in the living room. Patricia's living room had a mantel above the gas fireplace. On the mantel were photographs. James at his college graduation. James at his first job. James and Patricia at some event I did not recognize. James as a child in various stages of growing up. Not one photograph of me. We had been engaged for 7 months. I stood in front of that mantel for a long time. Then Patricia came in from the kitchen and saw me looking. She said, "Can I get you something to drink?" I said, "I'm fine. Thank you, Patricia." She said, "I keep meaning to update those photos. I just never seem to find the time." She smiled. The smile with teeth. I smiled back. I said, "Of course. No rush." I went back to the couch. I sat with my hands in my lap and I thought about my mother's biscuits. Flour and buttermilk and cold butter. You learn to feel when something is right. That goes for biscuits and for people. I had known for a long time that Patricia Hollis was not going to change. What I did not know was how far she was actually willing to go. I found out on a Tuesday morning in April. James had left for work at 7:15 a.m. Patricia had arrived at 7:43. She had a key. James had given her one the previous Christmas because she lived alone and he worried. I had accepted that. I had accepted many things. She let herself in while I was in the shower. When I came out, she was in our bedroom. She said she was looking for a book James had mentioned she could borrow. Our bedroom. Looking for a book. 7:43 in the morning. I stood in the doorway in my towel and watched her scanning the room, and I understood in that moment with complete clarity that there was no book. She was in my bedroom because she wanted to be in my bedroom. Because she wanted to see how I lived. How I kept things. Whether I was good enough for the evidence she could collect in those 4 walls. I said, "Patricia, the books are in the living room." She said, "Of course." I got turned around. She walked past me into the hallway. And then she saw the closet. The door was open. My dress uniform was hanging on the outside rod where I had put it the night before. I had a formal ceremony at Fort Bragg that afternoon. Commendation presentation. Kind of event you press your uniform for and lay out the night before and wear with the particular pride that 14 years earns you. Tricia stopped. She looked at the uniform. She said, "You are wearing that today?" I said, "Yes. I have a ceremony at Fort Bragg this afternoon." She said, "James mentioned you have these events often." I said, "It is part of the job." "Yes." She looked at the uniform for a moment longer. Then she said, "Must be hard. For a marriage. All of this." She gestured at the uniform. Like it was a problem. Like 14 years of service was something to gesture at. I said, "Patricia, was there something specific you needed today?" She said, "No. I'll let you get ready." She walked to the front door. She let herself out. I stood in the hallway. I looked at my uniform on the hanger. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. I was gone for 11 minutes. When I came back, the uniform was gone. I heard the back door close. I walked through the kitchen. I pushed open the back door. And I watched Patricia Hollis drop my dress uniform into the trash can and dust her hands together and say, "No army brat is going to ruin my son's life." I want to tell you what happened in the 60 seconds after she said those words. 'Cause those 60 seconds matter more than anything else in this story. Patricia was standing at my trash can in my backyard in Pinehurst on a Tuesday morning in April with her hands dusted together and that smile on her face. I looked at her. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not reach into that trash can and pull my uniform out while she watched. I said, "Patricia, I need you to leave my home right now." She said, "Diane, I am simply trying to protect my son from a lifestyle that," I said, "Patricia, leave my home right now." Something in my voice landed differently than anything I had ever said to her before. She left. I watched her walk around the side of the house to her car. I listened to her engine start. I listened to her back out of my driveway. Then I walked to the trash can. I reached in. I lifted my uniform out by the hanger. I shook it once. I carried it inside. I laid it on the bed. I sat beside it for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Then I picked up my phone. I did not call James first. I called my father. My father answered on the second ring. Retired Master Sergeant Thomas Carver. 66 years old. Currently probably at the hardware store on Main Street in Laurinburg doing whatever he did on Tuesday mornings. He answered and said, "Diane, what happened?" Not hello. Not good morning. Just what happened? 'Cause he is my father and he has known my voice for 38 years and he heard something in it in 2 syllables of his name. I told him everything. The key. The bedroom. The uniform. Trash can. No army brat is going to ruin my son's life. My father was quiet for 11 seconds. Then he said, "Are you going to the ceremony this afternoon?" I said yes. He said, "Good. You press that uniform and you go." I said, "Daddy, she put it in the trash." He said, "I know she did. You press it and you go. That uniform does not belong in a trash can and neither do you." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I am going to make a call." I said, "Daddy, you don't have to," he said, "Diane. I am going to make a call." My father served 22 years in the United States Army. He retired as a master sergeant. He had friends in places that Patricia Hollis of Pinehurst, North Carolina with her homeowners association and her golf course retirement community had never imagined. One of those friends was a man named General Raymond Wallace. They had served together in the early 90s. Kept in touch for 30 years. My father had been at General Wallace's retirement ceremony 2 years earlier. General Wallace had called my father when his wife passed last November. That kind of friendship. I did not know my father was going to call General Wallace that morning. I found out later. I pressed my uniform. I am going to say that again because it matters. I pressed my uniform. I took it out of the closet. I set up the ironing board in the bedroom. I pressed every crease back into place with the careful attention that 14 years of military service builds into your hands. The jacket. Trousers. The shirt. Every ribbon and badge checked and positioned correctly. Took 37 minutes. When I was done, I put it on. I looked at myself in the mirror. Sergeant First Class Diane Louise Carver. 14 years. 3 deployments. 2 commendations. I looked exactly right. I drove to Fort Bragg. The ceremony was at 1 p.m. in the main assembly hall. 200 soldiers and officers and family members seated in rows. Kind of room that smells like polish and pressed fabric and earned pride. I received my commendation at 1:47 p.m. General Wallace presented it himself. He shook my hand and said, "Outstanding service, Sergeant Carver. Your father speaks very highly of you." I said, "Thank you, sir. He speaks highly of you as well." He smiled. After the ceremony, General Wallace found me in the hallway. He said, "Your father told me what happened this morning." I said, "Sir, you didn't need to." He said, "Sergeant Carver, your father and I have been friends for 30 years. When he calls me, I answer. He asked me one thing." I said, "What did he ask?" General Wallace said, "He asked me to make sure the right people understood what kind of soldier his daughter is. And I told him I already knew. I have known since I read your service record this morning." He said, "I would also like to make a house call this afternoon if you can provide me with an address." I looked at General Wallace. United States Army. 2 stars. 40 years of service. A man who had earned every inch of the uniform he was wearing. I gave him Patricia's address in Pinehurst. Patricia Hollis opened her front door at 3:47 p.m. She was still in the clothes she had worn to my house that morning. She had a cup of tea in her hand. She was smiling before she even saw who it was, the way people smile when they open a door expecting a neighbor. That smile disappeared in under 2 seconds. General Raymond Wallace was standing on her front porch in full dress uniform. 2 stars on his shoulders. 40 years of service on his chest. Behind him was my father, retired Master Sergeant Thomas Carver, in his own dress uniform, the one he kept pressed and ready in the back of his closet in Laurinburg because he said a soldier is always ready. They had driven up together. 45 minutes from Laurinburg. For me. Tricia looked at the 2 stars. She looked at my father. She looked back at the 2 stars. General Wallace said, "Mrs. Hollis, my name is General Raymond Wallace, United States Army. I understand you are acquainted with Sergeant First Class Diane Carver." Patricia said, "Yes. She is my son's," General Wallace said, "fiancé." "Yes, ma'am. I am aware. I presented her commendation this afternoon at Fort Bragg. Standing soldier. 14 years of exemplary service. 3 deployments. I have rarely seen a service record of this quality." Tricia held her teacup. Her hand was not entirely steady. General Wallace said, "I also understand there was an incident this morning involving Sergeant Carver's dress uniform." Tricia said, "That was a misunderstanding," my father said. "Patricia. Just her name." The way my father said things when he had decided that was enough words. Patricia looked at him. My father said, "That uniform represents 14 years of service to this country. The next time you see it, I expect you to treat it accordingly." Tricia did not say anything. General Wallace said, "We appreciate your time, Mrs. Hollis. You have a good afternoon." He turned. My father turned. They walked back to the car. Patricia stood in her doorway holding her teacup until they pulled out of her driveway. My father called me at 4:23 p.m. He said, "It's done." I said, "Daddy, you drove 45 minutes. He said, "I would have driven to Alaska." I held the phone for a moment. I said, "Thank you, Daddy." He said, "Press your uniform, Diane. Always press your uniform." I said, "Yes, sir." James came home at 6:14 p.m. I was at the kitchen table. Cup of coffee. My uniform hanging back on the closet door where it belonged. The ironing board still set up in the corner because I had not put it away yet. He walked in. He looked at the uniform. He looked at me. He said, "Diane, my mother called me 4 times today." I said, "Sit down, James." He sat. I told him everything. The key. The bedroom at 7:43 in the morning. The uniform. Trash can. No army brat is going to ruin my son's life. The smile. My father. General Wallace on her front porch at 3:47 p.m. I told him all of it in the same calm voice I use when I am giving a briefing. Factual. Sequenced. No unnecessary words. James listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Kitchen clock ticked. Side on Cliffdale Road a car passed. The refrigerator hummed. Then he said, "She went into our bedroom." I said, "Yes." He said, "She took your uniform out of the closet." I said, "Yes." He said, "And put it in the trash." I said, "Yes." He looked at the table. I watched his face move through something. Not quickly. Slowly. The way a man moves through something when he has been telling himself a story for a long time and the story is no longer holding together. He said, "I knew she had a key. I thought she would only use it for emergencies." I said, "James, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly." He said, "Okay." I said, "How many of those phone calls were about me?" He did not answer immediately. I said, "The 3 times a week calls. The 40-minute conversations. How many of them were about me?" He looked up. He said, "Most of them." I said, "And what did she say?" He said, "Diane." I said, "James, what did she say?" He put his hands flat on the table. He said, "She said the military life was going to destroy our marriage before it started. She said you were more committed to the army than you would ever be to me." She said. He stopped. I said, "What else?" He said, "She said I deserved someone who would put me first. Someone who was home. Someone who was not going to leave for deployment and come back different." I looked at my fiancé. This quiet man who listened carefully and proposed with sweet tea on a back porch and made homemade potato salad for a 4th of July cookout. I said, "James, did you believe her?" He was quiet for 7 seconds. Then he said, "I believed her less and less every day. But I did not stop the calls. And I did not tell you what she was saying. And I should have done both of those things a long time ago." That was the most honest thing James Hollis had said to me in 18 months. I sat with it. I said, "Why didn't you?" He said, "Because she is my mother and she raised me alone and I have spent my whole life trying to make sure she is okay and I did not know how to stop doing that even when I could see it was wrong." He looked at me. He said, "Diane, she put your uniform in the trash." "Cannot." He stopped. He shook his head. He said, "I cannot explain that away. I cannot make that okay. I do not want to make that okay." I said, "What are you going to do about it?" He said, "I am going to call her tonight. And I am going to tell her that the key is no longer hers to use. And I am going to tell her that what she did this morning was the last thing of its kind that will ever happen. And that if she cannot treat you with the respect you have earned, then she will not have access to our home or our marriage." I looked at him. I said, "James, I need you to understand something. I have given this relationship everything I have. I have gone to 43 Sunday dinners. I have smiled through 43 evenings of comments about deployment and military schedules and what I do and do not deserve. I have done that because I love you and because I wanted to give her time." He said, "I know." I said, "I do not have more time to give her. What happened this morning was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice. She made it deliberately in my home with my property." He said, "I know." I said, "So I need to know. Right now. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Are you on my side?" He did not hesitate. He said, "I am on your side. I should have been standing here a long time ago. I am sorry it took me until now." I looked at this man. I thought about the 4th of July cookout, the potato salad, the back porch proposal, 2 glasses of sweet tea. I thought about 43 Sunday dinners and a mantle with no photographs of me and a key that had been used as a weapon on a Tuesday morning in April. I thought about my father driving 45 minutes in his dress uniform without being asked. I said, "Call her tonight, James." He said, "I will." He picked up his phone. He went to the bedroom. I heard him dial. I did not hear the conversation. I did not need to. I got up from the kitchen table. I went to the back door. I opened it. I stood on the back step in the April evening air looking at the yard. Trash can was still there. I walked over to it. I looked at it for a moment. Then I went back inside. I put the ironing board away. I hung my uniform back in the closet. And I made us both dinner. If you have ever waited for someone to choose your side and wondered if they ever would, drop a comment right now. Tell me what time it is where you are. Tell me if they chose right or if you had to walk away. 'Cause I want to know. James called his mother for 41 minutes that evening. I made chicken and rice and set the table and did not listen through the walls. When he came out, he sat down across from me. He said, "It's done." I said, "How did she take it?" He said, "She cried. Then she got angry. Then she got quiet. Quiet was the worst part." I said, "What did you tell her exactly?" He said, "I told her the key was no longer hers. I told her that what she did this morning was a line she crossed that cannot be uncrossed. I told her that you have given 14 years to this country and you have given 18 months of patience to her, and you will not be asked to give one more thing that you have not chosen to give." He paused. He said, "And I told her that if she wants to be part of our lives, she will call you directly and apologize. Not to me. To you. In person. And that apology will need to be real. Not managed. Not partial. Real." I looked at my husband to be across the dinner table. I said, "Thank you, James." He said, "I should have said all of that 6 months ago." I said, "Yes. But you said it tonight. That counts." He picked up his fork. He looked at the chicken and rice. He said, "This smells incredible." I said, "My mother's recipe." He said, "Of course it is." We ate dinner. The first dinner in 18 months that felt entirely ours. Patricia called me 11 days later. Not James. Me. A Tuesday morning at 10:15 a.m. I was at Fort Bragg. I stepped outside to take the call. She said, "Diane. It's Patricia." I said, "I know." She said, "I want to apologize. In person. If you will allow me." I said, "Okay." She said, "I would like to come to Fayetteville. This Saturday. Just you and me." I said, "Saturday at 10 a.m. She said, "I will be there." She was there at 9:58. I opened the door and she was standing on my porch in a gray cardigan and flat shoes and none of the armor she usually wore. No diamond earrings. No practiced smile. Just a 64-year-old woman who looked like she had not slept well in 11 days. I said, "Come in." We sat at my kitchen table. She had brought nothing. No flowers. No wine. Nothing to hide behind. I respected that more than I expected to. She said, "I have been sitting with what I did for 11 days. I have not found a way to make it make sense. 'Cause it does not make sense. I took something that represented your service and your sacrifice and I put it in a trash can because I was afraid." I said, "Afraid of what?" She looked at the table. She said, "Afraid that James loves you more than he needs me. And that eventually I will lose him completely." I sat with that for a moment. It was not a good reason. But it was an honest one. I said, "Patricia, I am not trying to take James from you. I have never been trying to take James from you. He loves you. That is not going to change because he married me." She said, "I know that now. I think I knew it before. I just could not make myself believe it." I said, "What you did to my uniform was not acceptable. I need you to understand that completely. Not as an explanation. As a fact." She said, "I understand." I said, "That uniform represents 14 years of my life. 3 deployments. Things I have seen and done that I will carry forever. When you put it in that trash can, you were not just putting fabric in a bin. You were telling me that those 14 years meant nothing to you." Her eyes were wet. She said, "I am sorry, Diane. I am genuinely sorry." I looked at this woman. 64 years old. Raised her son alone for 25 years. Loved him completely and desperately and in the particular suffocating way that sometimes comes from loving someone as your only anchor in the world. I understood that love even when I could not accept what it had made her do. I said, "Patricia, I accept your apology. But I need you to understand that things are going to be different going forward. He is gone. The Sunday dinners will continue if you want them to. But they will be on my terms and James's terms. Not yours." She nodded. She said, I understand. I said, and one more thing. She looked at me. I said, there is a shadow box above my desk at home. It has my service medals and my commendations inside it. The next time you are in this house, I want you to look at it. Really look at it. 'Cause that is who you put in your trash can. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I would like to look at it today. If that is all right. I stood up. I walked her to my desk. She stood in front of that shadow box for 2 minutes and 43 seconds. She did not say anything. She did not need to. James and I got married 7 months later. October. Fort Bragg Chapel. Small ceremony. 46 guests. My mother's biscuits at the reception because I had specifically requested them, and she had driven up from Laurenburg the day before and made 4 dozen in my kitchen starting at 5 a.m. My father walked me down the aisle in his dress uniform. General Wallace attended. He sat in the 3rd row. He shook James's hand at the reception and said, You are a lucky man. James said, I know, sir. I know. Patricia sat in the 2nd row on James's side. She wore a navy blue dress and pearl earrings. She cried through the whole ceremony. Real tears. The kind that have nothing managed about them. The reception, she found me between the dinner and the dancing. She put her hand on my arm. She said, Diane, you look beautiful. I said, thank you, Patricia. She said, I am proud of you. I should have said that a long time ago. But I am saying it now. I looked at her. I said, thank you. That means something. She nodded. She went back to her table. It was not a perfect ending. We were not suddenly close. We were not going to be the mother and daughter-in-law who called each other just to talk or took trips together or finished each other's sentences. But we were something. Something real. Something built on honesty and one very hard conversation at a kitchen table and a shadow box full of 14 years. That was enough. It was more than I had expected and exactly what I had hoped for, and sometimes those two things land in the same place. My dress uniform hangs in my closet on Cliffdale Road. I pressed it again this morning. Not because I have a ceremony today. 'Cause my father taught me that a soldier keeps their uniform ready. Not for other people. For themselves. For the reminder of who you are and what you have earned and what no one, not a mother-in-law with a key and a trash can and a fear she could not name, gets to take from you. I did not do it for revenge. I did it because of who I am. Drop a comment right now and tell me, what time is it where you are tonight? And tell me, has someone ever tried to put something of yours in the trash? Not literally. The thing that represents who you are. It's your work. Your sacrifice. Your 14 years. Tell me what you did. 'Cause I want to read every single one of those comments. If this story moved you, if you felt that ironing board or that front porch or that shadow box on the wall, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Honor Unveiled. We will see you in the next one.